Hello and welcome to Pint of Science Thailand. Sorry about that little hiccup at the start, but we are here and we are online. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Matt and I'll be one of your co-hosts tonight, and I'll hand you over to my other co-host, Pei Kyong.
Hi, thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Pei Kyong. I'm the co-director of Pint of Science Thailand. I'm the head of Bioethics and Public Engagement at the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit, or MORU. I shall be one of the co-hosts tonight with Dr. Matt Robinson, whom you've just heard just now. Pint of Science Thailand is brought to you by MORU, a collaboration between Mahidol University, Thailand and University of Oxford in the UK, and co-funded by Wellcome, a charity in the UK. Our headquarters is in Bangkok, but we work all over Thailand, namely Ubon Ratchathani, Chiang Mai and Mae Sot. We currently have projects in 11 Asian countries and 9 African countries. We conduct medical research such as in malaria, critical care medicine, maternal and child health, and since 2020, COVID-19. Pint of Science is part of our public engagement program, a program that aims to bring science and researchers to the general public and at public venues, either online or face-to-face. We have many public engagement projects, ranging from projects like this one to community-based projects in rural Cambodia and Laos, and closer to home on the Thai-Myanmar border with migrant workers and populations there. So welcome everyone to tonight's event. We are partnering with FCCT Thailand. And I pass over the floor again to Matt to tell you a little bit more about Pint of Science.
Thanks, Pei Kyong. Yes, we have an amazing lineup of speakers for you tonight. I am so happy that we're able to actually reach you at your homes tonight, as we cannot do this in person. So I know that many of our old friends from other Pint of Science events are joining us tonight, but I also know that we have a lot of new audience members today, which is absolutely fantastic. So for those who haven't been to Pint of Science event before, I'm sure the first question you're asking is, what is Pint of Science? So Pint of started back in London in 2012, where 2 scientists wanted to bring science to the public in a fun, relaxed and exciting way. So they thought, what better way to do that than bring scientists to the bars, pubs and cafes and give you, the audience, a chance to find out what exciting research is being done on your doorstep. Since that start in 2012, the Pint of Science has grown into an annual global event. In 2019, it has reached 24 countries with nearly 3,000 events held in almost 400 cities. Thailand joined the Pint of Science family in 2017, and since then we have been holding a number of events, both the main festival in May, but also one-night specials throughout the year. This year, unfortunately, because of COVID, it has been a little bit different. So we have gone online for the first time, and we have some amazing speakers for you tonight. We have Claire, Richard, Olivier, Piacon, and Yol, who will be speaking to us tonight. So you can always ask our speakers questions as well. So if you're online on the YouTube channel or Facebook, just type in your comment or your question in the comments, or you can even tweet us as well. And our amazing Pint of Science elves will get those questions straight to us to ask the speakers. Please do say hello to us. Please be social. We are available on Facebook, Twitter and Meetup and via our website. We'd also love to hear what you think of our events as well, especially tonight as it is our first ever truly online event. So there is a short feedback form which you can get here at this link, and we'll also show this at the end of the show. Finally, Pint of Science Thailand could not take place with the support of the MORU Tropical Health Network and with support from Wellcome, a UK charity. We must also thank our host and partners tonight, the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. So, let's kick off with our first speaker, Claire. Claire Chua-Preacher is a Wellcome Trust International Intermediate Fellow at MORU, the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit based in Bangkok. She'll be talking about dissecting the genetic information of a very important but often unheard of bacterial infection in Southeast Asia called Melioidosis. So, Claire, hello, good evening, and it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt, for an introduction, and thanks for having me tonight. Can you all see my screen now? Okay, perfect. So my topic is about a neglected tropical disease called melioidosis. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this disease before. If you have heard of it, could you please click like on social media, either Facebook or YouTube, to let us know. Well, melioidosis is caused by an environmental bacterium called Bucurella pseudomallii, which is depicted by the cartoon here. Patients, many of which are farmers working in a rice paddy field, could acquire this bacterium through inoculation. That is, when they've got the wound on their skin and the bacteria could get in, or ingestions. That is, when the patients drink contaminated water, or through inhalation. That's when the patients breathe in the bacteria, and this develop melioidosis. The mortality rate for this disease is pretty high. Half of cases died, and currently there's no vaccines available to prevent the population at risk. Fortunately, there's no human-to-human transmission, and that's made this disease geographically rather restricted. So historically, the known disease hotspot is restricted to northeast Thailand and northern Australia, as marked by the black triangle here. But as the microbiology infrastructure improves, this expands the endemic zone from Southeast Asia to South Asia, part of Africa, and to the Central and South Americas as well. And on top of this map, then we overlay it with the genomic data of the bacteria to track the global transitions. So you can use a phylogenetic trees, which is now shown on the top right-hand corner here, to understand the global disseminations of this bacteria and how the disease could travel from one region to the other regions. Don't be panicked if you haven't heard of phylogenetic trees before. I will talk through this slowly. So the outer ring is color-coded by the geographical origins of the bacterium. Green, yellow, blue, and red highlight the countries where the bacteria come from. Greens, these are bacteria from Australia. Yellow, these are bacteria from Southeast Asia. And blue and red, these are bacteria from Africa and the Americas, respectively. Now, if you look at the root of the tree, which is located here at the center of the diagram, that's indicate an Australian origins of the globally circulated Bucurella pseudomallii. And also you can see the branch of the Australian isolates is quite long as well. So this is indicative of a greater diversity of the bacteria in Australia compared to the rest of the world. Then you can see a change in the color stripe from green to yellow. That indicates a transmission out of Australia, from Australia to Southeast Asia in yellow, and then from Southeast Asia to Africa in blue, and then from Africa to the Americas in red. We could date the timeline when the recent common ancestors of the American isolates just land in the America, and that was dated back around the 18th century. Now I would like to ask you if you could think of any historical event that might facilitate the movement of bacteria from the Africas to the Americas around the 18th century. What would that be? And the hint is the voyage, the cartoon depicted here. Any thoughts? Well, we think that this timeline overlapped with the height of the slave trade. This event brought several millions of people from Africa to the Americas during that period. And it looked like humans' movement is not only restricted to human, but also the pathogens move with us. I think this observations echoes the recent SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, and it showed that this pathogen they do not need a visa to enter any countries, and this has an implication over our increasingly globalized lifestyle as well. Now you've seen on this map, and I show you that the bacteria seems to perform quite well. It's been successful in spreading. We next ask, what makes it so successful? And perhaps if we look at the evolution history of this bacteria, that might give us some clue. But before we look at that, let me introduce you to the DNA and the recombinogenic natures of Burkholderia pseudomallei. When I say recombinogenic nature, that means this bacteria recombine a lot, and the impact of these recombinations mean that the genetic contents of the bacteria is constantly reshuffled all the time. However, if there's any genes or particular genetic variants in the genomes that confer selective advantage, provide the bacteria adaptive advantage, then these genomes or genes will be co-selected together, regardless of the shuffling genetic background. And this can be manifested when we scan the genome. And this is our result when we scan the genome of slightly over 2,000 Burkholderia pseudomallei. The outer gray ring present the chromosomes locations, with chromosome 1 on the right-hand side and chromosome 2 on the left-hand side. The line in the middle link the co-selected genes pair together. So to interpret this data, this gene is linked with this genes. Now just by eyes, you can tell that this co-selected genes pair do not homogeneously distributed throughout the whole genome, but it seems to be concentrated to certain genes, and we call these genes the co-selection hotspot. This gene is called BPSL1661, coded for putative adhesin, and this gene is responsible for about 40% of the co-selection signals. Next, we ask what this gene does. We first look at the expressions patterns of these genes. When I say expressions patterns, that implies the gene's function. We learn that this gene does not function in any conditions, it's not constitutively expressed, but it's only expressed or it's only function under nutrients deprivation and under high acidity. We create a knockout mutants of these genes, and we were able to confirm the essential roles of these genes under nutrient deprivation. And actually, this result is consistent with the environmental sampling, which show that Burkholderia pseudomallei has a higher prevalence in nutrient-depleted soil. So it looks like Burkholderia is evolutionarily tailored to be so tough and to survive nutrient depletion. Now I'm going to pause a bit and then ask you that without evidence we just provide, the evolutionary piece of evidence show that this bacteria can survive tough nutrient depleted environment. What would be our humans' actions or anthropogenic activities that might have accelerated such conditions that might promote the survival of Burkholderia pseudomallei? And this is my naive guess. I think our poor agricultural farming might, at least in part, accelerate the soil nutrient reduction. And this is due to short rotations of farming. Farmers either perform slash and burn approach, burn crops residues at the end of the harvest seasons, and then replant the new plants soon after. There's not enough time for the soil to get the nutrient back. Also, constant farming of cash crops, such as cassava, may also contribute to lower soil's nutrient. And this creates a preferential survival of the bacteria, Bucurella pseudomallii, over other benign bacterium. And this might lead to a consequent rise of melioidosis in these regions. And to summarize, I talk about two scientific stories using the genomes of Bucurella pseudomallii. The first one aiming at tracking the global disseminations of bacteria. We show that the bacteria has an Australian reservoir and then transmit to Southeast Asia, to Africa, and through the America. And then we could date the recent transmission event, and that's linked with humans' movements as well. In the second studies, also using the genome, we show that the bacteria is evolutionarily trained to survive nutrient deprivation. And I would like to ask you to think about our actions that might have promoted such conditions for the survival of this nasty pathogen. Overall, I think to protect our health from a nasty disease such as melioidosis, we need to look after our environmental health as well as our own health. And finally, science is the global enterprise. This work would not be possible without our collaborators, whom I am very grateful. And thank you again for an opportunity to share these stories with you. Thank you so much. ขอบคุณค่ะ And if I just end screen sharing. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Right, so there's one question for you. I think you can see it too, right? Why are the bacterial hotspots in Northeast Thailand and Australia disjointed? Why is there a gap? I think this is what it means. Why isn't there the area continuum? Claire?
Okay. I think there's two possibilities. The first thing is the limitations due to the diagnostic facilities available. So Bucurella pseudomallii need BSL-3 lab to either manipulate the bacteria or to perform full arrays of analysis. And such facilities is not everywhere. So you can see that once the microbiology infrastructures in the local hospital improve, you can join small dots together and then it start to make sense. It might not be disjoint as such, but it's limited by the facilities. The second possibilities could be the real environmental suitabilities of the bacteria. So from the evolutionary studies, we show that this bacteria is good at adapting to nutrient-depleted location in some nutrient-rich environment, in some regions where they have a better nutrient in the soil, or the type of bacteria might be the majority, and that's keep the populations of Bucurella pseudomallii at lower level. In that case, you might not have many melioidosis cases. So I guess that's two possibilities, and it could be the mix of both.
Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you.
So we'll move on. Thank you so much, Claire, for that whistle-stop tour of your very, very interesting project in Ubon and the rest of Southeast Asia. Okay, so next up we have Professor Richard Moore, an infectious diseases doctor and head of epidemiology at the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit. Richard is from the UK, but has worked in Thailand for many years. Richard, the virtual floor is yours. Please. Oh gosh, we lost Richard. Okay. Matt. Go on.
Okay, so
Yeah, Oliver's next.
Okay,
Matt, you introduce
Oh.
Oliver.
I'll introduce Oliver. Yes, so our next speaker this time is going to be Olivier Evrard from the Institute of Research and Development in France and is based in Chulalongkorn University. So before COVID, everyone was wearing face masks for a very different reason. Every year from around this time onwards, we get the so-called smoky season where the air gets thick with pollution from fires and vehicles. So Olivier will guide us through the smog and hopefully shed some light and hopefully some cleaner air on the truth behind this subject. So good evening, Olivier, and it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to talk at the Pint of Science. So the topic I'm going to talk about tonight will be the haze crisis in Chiang Mai. So I'm working on this topic with a colleague from Hawaii University, Mari Mostafanezan, and we have received a funding from National Science Foundation until 2021 to work on this. So in northern Southeast Asia, and especially in Chiang Mai, in northern Thailand, an air pollution episode occurs nearly each year between February and April, a period that the local people refer to as the smoky season. The pollution cloud, which covers the main valleys of the area, is created by several natural and human factors, such as a long dry season, high atmospheric pressure, lack of wind, transnational air pollution, forest fires, and agricultural burnings, as well as an increasing urban pollution. Over the last decade, what was accepted as a normal seasonal event became an ecological crisis with social and political implications due to a growing awareness of the global worsening of air quality across Asia. Now, each year, the smoky season is largely covered in the main media, gives rise to protests, and generates tensions between inhabitants, officials, and the scientists. On this respect, the last 3 years have been exceptional years. Chiang Mai was again branded several times as the most polluted city in the world, ahead of cities like Delhi, Lahore, or Beijing. Several academics asked the authorities to declare the state of emergency, which the regional governor refused for fear that it would negatively impact the tourism industry. In 2019, the new king of Thailand even expressed concerns over the situation in Chiang Mai, which forced the Prime Minister Prayut to visit Chiang Mai for the first time he gained power in 2014. For all that, while air pollution was said to have reached unprecedented levels according to the networks of independent sensors, official measurements by the Pollution Control Department, or PCD, showed that if the situation was indeed very serious, the monthly average of PM10, which means the particulate matter inferior to 10 microns, so the monthly average of PM10 concentration in 2019 was not worse, and by far, than in 2004 and 2007. Why then did a seasonal phenomenon become an ecological crisis over the last years? Our ongoing research focuses on how environmental narratives are constructed, validated, contested, and finally how they are endorsed by environmental policies. We work in Chiang Mai City and in several upland and lowland villages, conducting interviews with a wide range of actors and using at the same time various archives and databases. So given the very short time allotted for this speech, I will focus here on 3 key messages and examples that demonstrate how a critical debate between natural and social sciences can help to overcome some of the blind spots that hamper a clear understanding of this phenomenon by policymakers, but also by civil society, and that threaten to reinforce social injustice and inequalities, especially between rural and urban populations. The first message is that science, is not only a lab activity, it is also a social and political process that can produce new knowledge as much as new uncertainties. A good example is the historical development of the measurement system for air pollution in Chiang Mai. Currently in Chiang Mai, air pollution is measured through a 20-year-old, geographically limited but scientifically certified system supervised by the Pollution Control Department, or PCD, at its 2 local stations. This system coexists with a series of recent unrelated initiatives among civil society and private sectors. In the course of the last 4 to 5 years, these private initiatives, mostly using low-cost sensors, have proved to be more popular among the general public for several reasons. First, they use and broadcast real-time data, while PCD publishes only daily averages. Both are useful, but real-time measurements tend to be considered more realistic by the general public, while in fact they can also over or underrate actual levels of air pollution. Second, the independent sensors mostly use the United States Modified Air Quality Index, or AQI, US AQI, for which the safety thresholds are twice lower than the Thai AQI used by the PCD. The way AQIs are calculated varies between countries, which clearly demonstrates how scientific measurements are deeply embedded in political choices. Finally, a third factor is that for many years, the general public only had access to PM10 measurements, meaning particulate matter smaller than 10 microns, on the PCD website. And the local authorities were, for several reasons, which I don't have time to explain here, reluctant to publish the PM2.5 measurements, PM2.5 for particulate matter smaller than 2.5 microns, which are more dangerous for human health. All these factors have rather unfairly fed local mistrust toward public measurements of air pollution and conversely made the independent websites providing air quality levels more popular. The multiplication of sensors has popularized the notion of PM10 and PM2.5 and raised public awareness, but at the same time, the differences between measurements have also produced new uncertainties. In turn, these uncertainties fueled controversies between different groups, such as political authorities, scientists, and local populations, and gave rise to what we could call emotional fireworks during each smoky season. The second key message is that science should be understood as a pedagogy of uncertainty. The development of networks of air pollution measurement in Chiang Mai has not so far allowed a clear answer to the question of the reality of the degradation of air quality in a long-term perspective. Is it really getting worse or not? And if yes, to which extent and how to prove it? So far, science is not able to answer this question. We know that seasonal air pollution has been affecting Southeast Asia for a long time, and we find records of it in the archives of the 19th century. However, scientific measurements of air pollution in Chiang Mai done by PCD exist only since the end of the 1990s. Those measurements, which we aggregated in this table by a 3-month average for February to April each year, do not show any clear long-term trend. Public awareness, however, which we measure on the same graph through the number of newspaper articles devoted to the issue of seasonal air pollution in Chiang Mai, increased dramatically in 2007 and 2012, and since then follows more or less the actual levels of particulate matters. A more appropriate way to answer the question of the reality of the long-term worsening of the haze crisis would therefore be to focus not only on the actual levels of particulate matters or on their size, but rather on their chemical nature. Of particular interest here are the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are chemically related organic compounds with various levels of toxicity and carcinogenic potential that bind the particulate matters. They come from vehicle traffic, pesticide use, and coal plants, and are more generally related to the huge increase of black carbon or soot carbon production in Asia as a whole. These new chemical compounds have probably changed the level of toxicity of the haze, but there are unfortunately very few data available to measure them and trace back the sources of emissions at the regional scale. This would require financial investments and clear political decisions that are currently lacking in Southeast Asia. Finally, a third message is that science can be used to sustain policies that are politically inefficient and socially unfair. After the last coup in 2014, the Thai junta has re-implemented a 60-day burning ban between mid-February and mid-April, which is precisely the period when farmers use fire to prepare their fields for planting rice and other crops. All fires are banned during that period, except those who have been registered and authorized in advance by local authorities. The aim is to control and reduce the amount of smoke going into the atmosphere, but significantly, however, no regulation is yet in place to manage the pollution caused by car and air traffic, nor by energy production in the lowlands. To implement this policy, the government relies mostly on satellite technology and the surveillance of so-called hotspots. Those hotspots are, in my opinion, another example of hybrid objects traveling in society without many questions being raised about their scientific status and their social implications. The ASEAN AIDS Action online page defines hotspots as image pixels whose brightness temperature exceed a predefined threshold value. Concretely, two satellites, MODIS and Terra, pass over northern Thailand once a day and detect area as small as 100 square meters where the temperature, to say it simply, is higher than what it should be. People convicted of voluntarily setting fire in those areas are reporting to the district authorities and subject to fines. The problem with such a method is threefold. First, we do not know exactly how the thresholds are decided and to which extent they reflect political decisions, such as in the case of the air quality index, which is also a combination of thresholds. Second, farmers can avoid the detection by the satellites if they burn in between the satellite passages, which indeed they are often encouraged to do by the local authorities who want to report an improving situation from one year to another to the central administration. Besides, this bird-eye view approach does not tell us anything about the social landscape of fire, the many reasons for which fires can be started. Furthermore, it ignores the long-lasting issue of land rights and land conflict in northern Thailand. Thirdly, in addition to being scientifically questionable, this fire-focused policy is also socially unfair and has proven largely inefficient. Between 2015 to 2018, many upland farmers had to follow the burning ban regulations and therefore took a high risk on their next harvest. Simultaneously, they observed that air pollution in Chiang Mai city was not improving proportionally, but farmers were still blamed for being responsible for it. This situation created a deep resentment towards the central government, which explained partly what happened in the spring of 2019. At that time, being fed up with the burning ban and its socio-economic impact on their livelihood and getting angry with private government, many of them used fire as a form of political protest right during the election period. As you can see on this slide, the number of hotspots dramatically increased in 2019 after 4 years of continuously decrease from 2014. So in conclusion, what I would like to say is that I do not challenge the fact that the haze season in Chiang Mai coincides with the use of fire by various segments of the population, nor that the surveillance of these fires is necessary, especially during dry years, to avoid unsafe levels of particulate matter. I'm only insisting on the fact that a purely hard scientific approach of this phenomenon, first, misses the social complexity of it, and two, fails to take into account the way new scientific objects infuse in society and how they are potentially sustaining inefficient and unfair policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Olivier, what an interesting talk. I've always wondered why the haze situation is so bad. I've got a question for you actually. This is a bit related to COVID. You know, in the first wave at least, the cases in Thailand were relatively low. Do you think it was because people were already wearing the 2.5 the masks to protect ourselves from PM 2.5? Olivier?
Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That's. The point is that I missed one word of your question. Which cases were you talking about? Sorry, can you?
So COVID cases were relatively low in the beginning of 2020, but at that time the haze situation was really bad and everybody was already wearing masks. What do you think? Do you think it has something to do with it? The fact that cases were quite low and the pollution at that time, and people were already wearing the mask.
Well, certainly the fact that people are using masks definitely help to prevent COVID spread. That's for sure. But to my knowledge, there is no clear relation made yet from a scientific point of view between air pollution and spread of COVID. We only know that, of course, people who are weakened by a constant exposure to air pollution may be more prone to severe cases of COVID due to their lung situation. But in Chiang Mai in 2020, I would say that anyway in Thailand the number of cases was quite low as a whole, and in Chiang Mai it was even lower. So I don't think, probably masks help, but that was for such a very small number that I'm not sure we can take any conclusion from it.
Okay, sorry to make you speculate. Thank you very much.
No, it's okay.
Shall we take one other question before moving on? I've got one here.
Yeah, meaning I was
why don't we move to Richard? Richard's back, right? Okay, so Professor Richard Mott is an infectious diseases doctor and head of epidemiology at Moru. Richard is from the UK and has worked in Thailand for many years already. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Baek-Yong. Let me do screen sharing. Okay, so I'm going to talk about face masks in Thailand. We've been doing a study during COVID to see how much people are using masks. So I'll tell you a bit about the science, and then I'll go into some details of what we found in our study. So face masks have been widely recommended for COVID to prevent transmission. But how do they work? Well, we know that masks can block the droplets that people breathe out, which carry the virus. So then somebody else can breathe them in and potentially become infected. So the mask can reduce COVID-19 from spreading in two ways. Either infected people wearing a mask are then less likely to infect others, and then people that are not infected that wear a mask are less likely to catch it from somebody who is infected. So both groups can benefit. However, it's very important that you have to wear the mask correctly so that it's fully effective. There's a lot of discussion about different types of mask. So I've put some examples here on the right. There's three main types, and commonly called N95 or equivalent masks are thought to be the most protective, and they're widely used in medical healthcare settings. Then there's surgical and medical masks, and then there's many other types of masks which you can buy. Some of them have these valves, which you can see here, which they're not recommended because the air can then flow one way. So people can become infected despite wearing a mask. So in addition to masks, people have to follow the other recommendations. The evidence for how well masks work in preventing COVID is still being gathered. We know that it has some effect, but it's very important that people don't just rely on masks. So social distancing in Thailand is recommended at 1 to 2 meters. Carefully washing your hands, doing it properly for 20 seconds, soap and water or alcohol gel if soap and water is not available. Avoiding crowded places, working from home, and many other measures. So we have to keep up to date with what's recommended with our government. And Thailand has a set of recommendations on the Ministry of Public Health website, widely publicised. In here, there's some pictures of examples from around Bangkok. So on the bottom left, we've got a restaurant where people can't sit next to each other. There's a social distancing sign here with no sitting in an apartment block in Bangkok. In the middle, here's a bus stop with social distancing and mask usage being recommended. And here's a lift with where to stand in the lift to minimize the number of people, so people face away from each other as well. And at the top here, we have a hospital, a warning sign about not going through this gate in the hospital. On the right is a common sign that you see in shops and malls, supermarkets in and around Bangkok, with a list of the different recommendations, recommending a maximum number of people allowed in the shop, and then masks, hand washing, and distancing. So face mask wearing has been recommended in Thailand since late January 2020 by the Thai government, and it's been required to enter certain buildings, for example, shopping malls. It's now required by law since the end of last month. When you're in public or in a shared vehicle, it's required that you wear a face mask, and there are fines for people that don't do so. So what do we know about face mask usage in Thailand? Well, there's been surveys done, lots of surveys, when people are asked, do they use a face mask? And in those surveys, the majority of people say that they do. And there's some information about where they say they do it, but nobody's actually measured how much people are wearing masks in different settings. So we're relying on people being honest and fully remembering how much they've worn masks, which is not so good as a source of information. So what we've done is we've been running this project called the Mask Project, the Mask Assessment Study in Krungthep. The objective is to measure face mask usage during the COVID-19 pandemic in Thailand. And the design is very simple. We just have a set of researchers that have been trained to observe people in different settings in and around Bangkok, to count people that wear masks, the different types of masks they wear, whether they're wearing the mask correctly. This is done during the researchers' daily activities. We don't want the researchers to go around mixing with people and having additional risk of COVID exposure. So it's done during their journey to work, during essential trips to the shops, etc., whilst following the Thai government regulations. So the COVID-19 situation in Thailand, you probably remember if you're in Thailand that things started in January with the first case, and then there was a first wave in February, March, April, and our mass project started here just at the beginning of this first wave. So as you'll know, things have changed a lot since then. There was a long lull when there were relatively few cases, and then in December there was a sudden increase in cases, which is the second wave, and then it's dropped down. There's been a huge increase in the last couple of months. So our study is split into two phases. We did a lot of intensive work with lots of staff in the phase 1 during the first wave, and then we've continued to collect data with a smaller group of staff in a smaller set of locations right through phase 2 up to the third wave. And here you can see in blue that in the first wave, most of the cases were in Bangkok. And then later, the second wave, there are a lot in Samut Sakhon province. And then the third wave, we've got quite a lot in Bangkok, but then it's spread more around the country. So our study so far, we've counted 120,000 people. Phase 1, we had about 13,500, and then phase 2 is the rest. And we've covered different settings, including healthcare facilities, commercial facilities, which are shops, shopping malls, supermarkets, markets, different types of public transport, higher education, schools, which has been difficult because schools have been closed for some of this time, so the numbers are relatively small. We've counted on different types of street, in residential areas, outdoors, in apartment blocks, and then at other different types of workplace as well. So this is in phase 1. We just showing some example results here. You can see that the majority of people were wearing a mask, so 89% overall. And in healthcare settings, this percent was very high. It was above 95% of people were wearing a mask. And when we say wearing a mask, we mean they had a mask on and correctly worn. So this part at the top is the people that didn't have any mask, or it was just worn incorrectly and therefore not protecting them. In these residential settings, most of this being outdoors, you can see the proportion wearing masks was a lot lower. So as I said, we continue to do these counts, and then this is every 2 weeks. We have a column showing mask wearing overall in this group of people. And we found consistently, on average, 91% of people wore a mask. So that's wearing a mask correctly, which is very high. You can see here that the proportion of people wearing a surgical or medical mask has gone up, particularly early this year. There's been an increase in the availability of those types of masks. Proportion using these other types of cloth masks or foam masks, or the ones with the valves, that's gone down. And interestingly, the usage of masks increased when the second wave began. So there's a sudden jump in the proportion of people wearing medical or surgical masks. So if you look just outside of healthcare settings, so this is not including hospitals or clinics, you can see the proportion is lower. So overall, 86% are wearing a mask. And again, you see this jump in mask usage at the beginning of this second wave. In healthcare settings, the proportions are much higher. So this is healthcare staff. 97% of them in these healthcare settings indoors are wearing a mask. There's again this small jump at the beginning of the second wave. If we look at patients and the public in the same healthcare settings, the proportion is even slightly higher than the staff at 98%. We can split the data into observations that were done in indoor settings and outdoor settings. So this is indoors, with overall, throughout this time, 95% of people wearing a mask and wearing it correctly. And then the proportion has dropped a little bit towards the end, and then we don't have data after this time. But just before the third wave, you can see a small drop in the proportion, and whether that's related is not clear. Outdoors, the mask wearing is much less. It's 77% overall, still a lot more than in many other countries. So as part of this project, we did a smaller study of 2,000 people where we looked in more detail at people that weren't wearing masks or weren't wearing them correctly. So we looked at what they were doing. You can see at the top here, we've got examples of wearing a mask under your nose, or not covering a chin, or hanging off your ear, or even under the chin. Correct way to do it is shown here on the left, covering the whole of your face from the nose to under the chin. So we've got people that have observed 2,000 people, 1,000 in July to September last year, and then another 1,000 in January to March this year. And we're finding around 40% of these people that are not wearing or incorrectly wearing no mask at all, and the rest have a mask, but they're just not using it right. So there's a lot of potential to improve things here. We also looked at the age group they're in, the gender, what setting it was in, and what they were doing at the time. So 17% of these people in the first part had a good reason, like they were eating something at the time while walking down the street, or they were drinking or smoking. And then later on, it was 27% that had a good reason. So to try and help with this, we've had a separate project where we've been interviewing people and developing videos to educate people about how to protect themselves from COVID. And we have a video about face masks. People can use this link to watch the video. So it's on YouTube. If you type this link, you'll get taken straight to it. There's also a video on hand washing, and there's another one on personal protective equipment for healthcare workers. So hopefully they're useful. The study that we did, we found that watching these videos helped improve people's knowledge. So clearly they must be teaching people something. In conclusion, so overall 91% of people wore a face mask correctly in Thailand, in and around Bangkok, during the first year of the pandemic. There's around 5 to 6% wore a mask incorrectly, and about 3 to 4% wore no mask at all. There's a need to improve correct use of face masks all over the world, and also in Thailand it would help get rid of this 5 to 6%, and that can be done with videos, as I've shown. These pictures are just other examples of incorrect usage of face masks from the US CDC. I'd just like to acknowledge the team who helped process this data and collect the information. And my email address is here if you'd like to ask more information, and then there's also the Moro website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was really interesting. well, there's one question coming in, right? Do you know if other countries are doing these the same study, or are you planning to expand it in other countries? It'd be nice to compare with another location, wouldn't it?
It's a great question. Yes, to our knowledge, there is no other country doing this. We have made some provisional plans to do it in other countries. It would be quite easy to set up.
Okay. Where's that question gone? Thank you, Richard. I think this might be for, it could be for you, Richard, or for Olivier. There are studies linking exposure to PM 2.5 and COVID severity. Have you any idea if this is seen in Thailand too? I think, yeah, go ahead, Richard.
So we are currently running a study to look at this. There isn't anything published yet for Thailand, but there is quite good evidence from the US to show there's a linkage.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next speaker is Kun Piapon. We're very pleased to have Kun Piapon with us today. She is an attorney at law and a patent agent in Teleke and Gibbons, specializing in patent matters for both international and domestic clients. She has an educational background in both biotechnology and law, and she focuses her work in the life sciences sector. Kun Piapon, เชิญค่ะ
Thanks, Peyon, for introducing me. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me tonight as well. Today, I'm going to talk about science in the view of patent attorney. Actually, before I'm becoming a lawyer or patent lawyer, I was a scientist before. So today, my talk will be just like sharing my experience, highlighting that what innovator, any entrepreneur, scientist, or anyone that dealing with the technology, the development of technology or science should be aware of in the view of patent law. Okay, let's start with my first. This is an overview of the process. Actually, when we invent something that is new and have a value in the market, of course, we would like to launch it to the market, sell it in the market in order to get the income, right? When I was a science student a long time ago, I was wondering that if I can invent something that is new, no one's invented like this before, and it have a value in the market, it can solve the technical problem that like a current technical problem. How can I stop others from copying my invention when I launch my invention or my product into the market? In that time, I try to find out, and I find that, okay, before I launch the product or my invention into market, I have to file a patent application because it can stop others from copying my invention. In that time, I just say that, okay, I jump to filing the application and then launch the product. But after that, when I was I'm start to be a patent lawyer, I realized that before launch the product, there are some steps that we have to take into the consideration or should be aware of before we launch the product. It's not only just file a patent application. Okay, let's start with the first step. The first step is identify protection for your invention or your product that you're going to launch into the market. Identifying the protection. If the development that you made to that product is just about a visual appearance of the product. So, for example, this bottle is just a visual appearance. So you go for design patent. If the development that you do in that product or in your invention is related to technical feature that can solve the current technical problem, for example, vaccine. Okay, you can go for either patent or trade secret. How can we determine which one we should go for? We should consider once we launch our invention into the market, if it can be reverse engineered by the person that know it, can buy and reverse engineer it and know the knowledge inside. If it's like that, you file a patent application. However, if it cannot be reverse engineered, okay, you go for keep it as a trade secret under the law. Okay, this is when you define the protection of your product. You move to the next step is the patent searches. Actually, patent searches can be conducted before this step, the first step, or at the same time as the first step as well, or after the first step is okay as well. There is many types of patent searches. For example, patent landscape or patentability search. For the patent landscape, we will focus on the for example, if we interested in vaccine technology platform, and we focus on this technology and do a patent search to analyze the data of the patent data, and see what it will review business, scientific, and technology trend. So you will know that which company is for the most patent application in this area, who is a key player, how many applications do they have in this field. So this is very important. It's very useful for the R&D team in each company to develop further on their invention. And it also can be used by a marketing team. Use this as a marketing strategy as well. For the patentability search, I recommend that we do it before filing the application, because this patentability search or para search can help us to identify whether our invention, our claim invention that we're going to file the patent application would meet patentability requirements, such as it have a novelty or involve an inventive step or not. Yeah. So this will help us to identify whether we will be success to get this as a patent. Okay, move to the third step. This is filing the patent application. But before we file the application, we must be ensured that the detail of your invention must be not disclosed to anywhere in the world. It must be kept confidential. If you publish or disclose to anywhere before filing the application, those information that you publish will destroy the novelty or destroy the patentability requirement of your invention once the application have been filed. So this is just be careful that everything should be kept confidential. Do not disclose the detail of your invention anywhere before filing the application. Okay, once you file the application in Thailand, in anywhere, for example, you have a market in Thailand, you file application in Thailand, and you also have a market in Singapore or in Japan. You also have to file the application in those countries as well, that you have a market, that you plan to sell your product there, in order to get the protection in that country. Because the application that you file in Thailand will not, patent protection will not extend to other country. That's why we have to list where is our market, and we file the patent application in those countries. Okay, once we file the application, for example, in Thailand, and we file in Singapore and Japan as well. So we prosecute it until the patent has been granted. When it has been granted, we can enforce. We can enforce to anyone that infringe your claim invention or your claim product. When you enforce, you can stop others from selling manufacturing or importing the same product that was to say what is the same as you claim in the patent application as well. So you can stop all of them to do like that. Okay, and at the same time, more than enforcement, you can commercialize it as well, because patent is an intangible asset. You can transfer or sell to someone that are interested in your patent and get the money. Or you can license it to anyone that are interested to use this right in Thailand or in the country that you file the application. Okay, we move to the next one. Next one, if before launching the product, this fourth step is very important. This is called FTO search and analysis. FTO is from freedom to operate search and analysis. Why we conduct this search? When we conduct this search, we will conduct in each specific country. For example, we have a market in Thailand. We search freedom to operate. We conduct a freedom to operate search in Thailand to see if there are any valid patents that we would infringe in the future. This step should be we recommend to conduct before launching the product, because we found that if some scientists, they just launch the product, and after that they got a notice from a lawyer that informed them that their product infringed the patent number blah blah blah. Yeah, so I just recommend that this is a very important step to be conducted before launching the product. So this is all that I'm just want to highlight to any scientist or anyone that's involving in the development of science. Okay, next one is patentability versus freedom to operate. I got a lot of questions from scientists that I work with. That okay, if my invention is new and can get a patent, so it means that it's new. No one invent like this before. That's why I got the patent granted. So I will not infringe anyone. But in fact, it would not be like that. You still have a chance to infringe others as well, if they have a valid patent. Okay, let's see this table. This is type of patent in Thailand. So I will talk about patent or PT patents, because this type of patent is dealing with any technical feature, the development of technical feature that can solve the current technical problem, right? For example, vaccine is of course have a technical feature that can deal with the COVID-19 virus. For this patent, PT patent, they require the requirements, patentability requirement, both require novelty. Novelty is require novelty. Novelty is very novelty. That is when we compare to the novelty, it means that your invention must be novel or new. When compared to the prior art means that any disclosure that was disclosed to the public before the patent, the date of patent, the date of filing of your application. And if it's new, okay, they have a patent. You get a patent or either PT patent. And next is inventive step. If your application or claim invention involve inventive step, it means that when you terminate the inventive step, it means that your claim invention would not obvious to the person skilled the art in the view of the prior art. The prior art is any disclosure that is published before the filing date of your patent application. Okay, okay. Okay, it's for the vaccine. I just want to highlight that it's vaccine technology. This vaccine technology actually many COVID-19 vaccine developed from the technology that we already have. So once we develop from the technology that we already have, we have to make sure that we will not infringe any valid patent that is related to this technology. For example, mRNA, of course, they have the patent protection with them. Okay, so it means that if you can get a patent, but it doesn't mean that you will not infringe anyone because your claim invention developed based on the technology that already have a patent protection. Okay, for this filing, I just highlight that Thailand have the PT patent, but in some country doesn't have. So be careful. For example, Vietnam, Brunei, United States, and Europe. So they doesn't have a PT patent system like in Thailand. So just be careful. Okay, at the end, I'm coming out of time. This is all from me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pirkon, for an absolutely fascinating talk. That was really interesting seeing the more legal side of science at the moment. Obviously, that has been quite in the forefront in some of the latest activities around the world. And we actually have two questions I see for you related to the legal patents and COVID. So the first question is, for drug development such as vaccine or COVID-19 drugs that are currently in use, how can patent protection allow or help equitable access for the drug and vaccine?
Yes, actually, this is a very important topic and controversial right now. Actually, when we have all of these vaccines have a patent protection on it, right? This is actually I will like if we file that they have a patent protection on it, we may got ask for the licensing on it in order to prevent some of the infringement in the future. But however, right now, I saw that many countries, for example, in the US, also support the waiver to the IP rights related to the COVID-19 innovation. So we have to see if there is a waiver, should be every scientist can get into this much more. Yeah.
Okay, so in the case of having a waiver or not having a waiver, I mean, what would be the benefits of having a waiver rather than having it as a patent?
The benefit, right? Actually, we give the patent or monopoly right to the innovator or because we want them to develop furthermore and disclose what they thought or what they think. This is like a reward to the scientists. However, right now is a pandemic. If we can stop the pandemic quicker by wearing this, it should be more benefit to the world. That is what the policymaker right now think on that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Pirkon. I have a feeling that conversation will be going on for a few months still down the line. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses through the current pandemic. Before we move on, I just want to say that I know we've got a few other questions coming in for some of the earlier speakers. So after the next talk, we'll do a bit of an open session to sort out some of those final questions. So our next speaker, last but by surely no means least, is Associate Professor Yoel Lovell, who is also based at Moru in Bangkok. Now, during the last year and a bit, there's been a lot of talk about clinical trials. But the question is, what are they really, and how do you actually run a clinical trial? So Yoel will shed the light on that and many other questions, I am sure. So without further ado, good evening, Yoel. Thank you for joining us, and it's over to you. So, yep. So perhaps
Matt, there's two
at the
questions.
moment, yep. So perhaps at the moment we'll go through some of these other questions while you can sort out his microphone. So some of the questions I've got in front of me here. So I think this one might be for Richard. Are you planning to extend the project to see whether the current COVID-19 cases spike had an impact on mask wearing?
Yeah, we're just talking about that now and trying to motivate the team to get going again, having done so much work for such a long period. So hoping so, yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, can you hear me
now? Okay, excellent. So, we'll go straight to Yoel now. So, yes, Yoel, without further ado, again, good evening, and it's over to you.
Okay, thank you, Matt, again. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. Let me just pull up my slides here. Okay, hopefully you can see the slides. So, the title of my talk is a play on words from a poem that many of you with young children may well have read them, hoping to build up in them some resilience and stamina. Now, reading our children inspirational poetry is just one of countless things that we do in our daily lives, assuming they have some kind of beneficial effect. In this case, there's no real risk or cost involved, but that's not always the case. So consider this recent example of a herbal remedy that's commonly used in Thailand, which, according to this Bangkok Post headline, is also a cure for COVID-19. So can we declare the pandemic as now under control? Sadly not, and for reasons I'll come back to in a moment. This story did, however, cause a rush on Pha Talai Joan, the herbal remedy, which was followed shortly after with a warning from health officials that its consumption can actually cause kidney and liver damage. So whether it's treatments for COVID-19 or reciting poetry to our children, how do we determine what interventions really work? So this hierarchy of scientific evidence shows the ability of different study designs to identify causal relationships, such as whether a treatment cures a disease. Unfortunately, it also shows the relative abundance of evidence from the different layers. So at the very bottom are case studies and expert opinion, which in the case of the early COVID response, they really dominated. And yes, you all remember the Fauci versus Trump wars, for instance, and lots of experts weighing in with their opinion as to what should happen. In the middle layers, we find study designs that look for associations between things like different risk factors or treatments and health outcomes. Now, all of these suffer from their own biases, but the key limitation they all share is that they cannot determine whether these associations represent a genuine causal relationship. For example, the fact that COVID patients that took Pha Talai Joan, the herbal remedy, also recovered from illness does not imply a causal relationship, as we have no idea how they would have fared without taking the herbal remedy. So how about simply comparing these patients with others that didn't take Pha Talai Joan? Well, many such studies were done for COVID-19 early in the pandemic, and they caused a lot of hype and disappointment. The problem with many of these studies is that patients that did receive the treatments were often very different from those that didn't. So this might happen, for example, when the new experimental treatments are given only to patients who are so severely ill that this might be their only hope. So comparing them with other patients who are less severely ill doesn't really give us a genuine understanding of whether the treatment is beneficial. To determine causality, we need to run randomized controlled trials. So in this example, participants are randomly assigned to an intervention group or to a control group. And this random allocation is where the magic really happens, as this assures that these individuals are similar in every single way, other than in whether or not they receive the intervention. If we then find a meaningful difference between the groups, that provides a strong indication that this was due to the intervention. So success in a trial like this is great, it's a good start, but there's no guarantee whatsoever that this would actually work in other populations or settings different to those of the trial, which is why at the very top of the pyramid we find meta-analyses. This is where we bring together findings from lots of different trials to see if there was a consistent result. The world, unfortunately, is a very messy place, and what genuinely works in one trial or in one setting might not work in others. Therefore, by averaging these results out, we could actually end up dismissing the use of interventions that could be useful in some settings, but not in others. So I'm going to describe my own journey up this pyramid, with some apparent successes along the way, but these really highlighted why we needed further randomized trials after these successes. And lastly, I'll describe some minor innovations we're doing to the top layers of the pyramid to try and facilitate more large-scale, pragmatic randomized trials. So much of my research has focused on evaluating diagnostics and treatments to improve the management of febrile illness in low-resource settings. Until about a decade ago, patients with a fever in malaria endemic settings were, by and large, supposed to be treated with antimalarials. These were the guidelines, unless there was another obvious cause of illness. Now, this did imply a lot of overuse of antimalarials, which in turn drove the spread of antimalarial resistance, and also meant that lots of patients with other infections were wrongly treated. The increasing availability of rapid malaria tests in the early 2000s meant that patients everywhere could now be tested before being treated with antimalarials. And as part of my PhD, I did some work demonstrating that this could be a very cost-effective strategy. Now, these findings were published in high-impact journals, and I was lucky enough to present them at the WHO and Global Fund discussions before they decided on a shift in strategy and guidelines and funding for universal use of malaria IDTs. So all seemingly a great success. But I was also very well aware that the models that I was doing relied on what we call heroic assumptions, which basically means a lot of guesswork. For example, one of the most important factors or parameters in the model was the fatality rate for patients with malaria when they were untreated. Now, we can't run an experiment to see what happens when we don't treat patients with severe malaria to find out this fatality rate. So we do have to rely on things like expert opinion. And this is very common in modeling. But we decided to do it a little bit more systematically by consulting a broad range of experts to see if there's anything like a consensus opinion about these parameters. So as you can see in this graph, we ended up with widely differing answers to these questions, which essentially meant that instead of consulting a world-leading malariologist, I could equally have just thrown a dart on a board and picked out a number at random to put in my model. Now, needless to say, the change in guidelines was based on a hell of a lot more than just my cost-effectiveness modeling, so that's a good thing. And that did include several clinical trials that demonstrated that the use of malaria IDTs could safely reduce the use of antimalarials. But how well do such trial results generalize across settings? And do their findings remain relevant over time? For example, and counterintuitively, the information provided by malaria IDTs might be of lesser value in areas where malaria transmission is very high, because a large proportion of the population in these areas will have parasites circulating at all times, whether or not they're febrile. The effectiveness of diagnostic tests or treatments can also change over time. And in this instance, we've seen some evidence to say that the parasites have evolved to evade the diagnostic test. So this is a lot like the concern we currently have over the COVID variants evading vaccines. So this is all really just to emphasize that we will often need a lot more trials in different populations and locations and times to verify what works, where and when. But perhaps the biggest consequence of rolling out malaria tests was the impact they would have on patients testing negative for malaria, who are now increasingly treated with antibiotics. And this fueled the emergence and spread of antibiotic resistance. This also highlighted the importance of understanding the causes of non-malarial febrile illness and the urgent need for interventions to improve their care. So over the last decade, we've seen lots of studies coming out that have been investigating the causes of non-malarial febrile illness. And the pie charts on the top left show some typical results from these studies. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of variety of diseases out there, and we don't have the ability to test for them all at point of care, not yet anyway. So one alternative to rolling out tests for all these diseases was to use biomarker tests that differentiate between bacterial and viral infections, and therefore just help us guide to the use of antibiotics. And based on several studies that we did, and others, we showed that, at least in our settings, testing for CRP levels could outperform healthcare workers in the ability to identify patients with a bacterial infection. So this work and other such studies generated enough interest from industry to support the development of a new combined malaria CRP test. And our own modeling work suggested that these tests could have a very positive impact if they were rolled out instead of regular malaria tests alone. So once again, a very promising outcome, but did we really have enough evidence to support wide-scale use of the tests? Well, let's go back and look at one of these pie charts for common causes of febrile illness, in this case in Laos. And what we see here is the distribution of diseases such as dengue and scrub typhus, which are common in the region. But this pie chart can be a little misleading, as the chart includes only patients in whom the laboratory tests were able to identify the cause of illness. In actual fact, this is only half of the story, because in the other half of patients, no pathogen was detected. And while CRP levels in these patients was high on average, we have no real indication as to whether or not they would have actually benefited from an antibiotic. So again, the only way to determine the value of CRP testing in febrile patients as a whole was by running a randomized trial. So up the pyramid we climbed, and we ran a randomized trial recruiting 2,400 febrile patients in health centers across Thailand and Myanmar to see if CRP testing could help safely reduce the use of antibiotics. Academically, we had a great result, publishing it in a high-impact journal and showing that on average there was a modest reduction in antibiotic prescribing. But there was actually a lot of variability between the countries and between the age groups. So what worked in one place or in one subgroup didn't work as well in others. There were also limitations to the study design that probably diminished the difference between the intervention group and the controls, and therefore the apparent benefit of CRP testing. So overall, not a terrible result, but clearly we needed to run more trials and in more real-world settings to determine whether we can have a genuine positive impact. So a quick recap. We've seen that findings from inferior study designs or even just expert opinion are abundant, whereas randomized control trials that can provide higher quality evidence are relatively scarce. When trials are available, they might be done in only a single site or in a small subgroup of the population and might not be reflective of the real-world context. Over the past few years, we've therefore been working on two projects that aim to facilitate more large-scale real-world trials, one for interventions in global health research, and the other for those in use in our everyday lives. So first, we have the South and Southeast Asian Community-Based Trials Network, or CCTN. In this project, we're establishing a network of village health workers and low-level health facilities across hundreds of villages in rural South and Southeast Asia. Over the next few years, we aim to collect data and samples from approximately 100,000 patients with a febrile illness to better understand the causes of fever in the region. We'll also be conducting verbal autopsies to determine how many deaths are associated with febrile illnesses or other causes, as well as going to households to get a better idea of overall health status. All this information will first be used to design interventions to improve the management of febrile illness that will then go on to run large-scale, pragmatic, randomized trials across the network to see how well they really work. Given the large number of villages in the network, we can carry out these cluster randomized trials, which mean we can allocate entire villages to one intervention or another, which can be a much more effective way to run real-world trials without some of the limitations I previously alluded to. In the longer term, we'll broaden our focus to other causes of morbidity and mortality in the region. So you can learn more about the project and track our progress on the website listed here. And that's what keeps me mostly busy nowadays in terms of my day job. What keeps me up at night with excitement is another project, which, although very different in context, shares a similar aim. So I mentioned earlier how we all choose to do things every day that we hope are beneficial, like taking different nutritional supplements or probiotic drinks or different dietary regimes like intermittent fastings. But often these have very little solid data or evidence to back them up. Despite being of very high public interest, these questions just don't receive a lot of attention from the research community. Where relevant studies are available, they'll mostly be from the lower rungs of the pyramid, with the inferior study designs I mentioned. Making matters worse, nowadays we face an avalanche of information flooding us through social media and networks. Much of it is pure sensationalist nonsense, and some of it is driven by its commercial value. So the idea behind this project was to instead try and harness the forces of social networking for good by building a platform where people can propose research questions that are of broad shared interest and collaboratively design and run large-scale web-based trials to answer them. So with the support of a small public engagement bursary from Moru, we put together the first version of Demos Science. And this really is public engagement with science, but on steroids. On the platform, people can propose ideas for new research studies or join existing research teams to help with their design. We're establishing a library of randomization tools, survey templates, and other support to help run these trials. What you see here are some examples from undergraduates in Canada who've been using the platform to come up with research questions and some very interesting ideas for web-based trials to answer them. The one I actually highlighted here on the right was actually proposed by my son, who we recently encouraged to try this online program that claimed to help kids with ADHD to improve their concentration and executive skills. Sam, however, was very unhappy with the program, and so he proposed a study on Demos, with his hypothesis being that it was all false advertising. So he's actually looking for a statistician, if anyone out there wants to join his team. We've also developed an educational component where people can learn a lot more about randomized trials by participating in one themselves, looking at the effect of different types of music on concentration. This is all very much work in progress, and there's clearly a hell of a lot more that needs to be done, not just in terms of the technical development, but perhaps more importantly, working through the many methodological, scientific, and ethical questions involved in running trials this way. But the current version is fully functional, so you're welcome to jump in with your ideas. In fact, we'll be launching a prize competition soon for the best Demos trial proposal that will then proceed to run on the platform. These are some of the individuals who've helped bring it all to life, so a big thank you to all of them and to all of you for listening. If you do have a few minutes after this talk, you're more than welcome to follow this link and actually participate in the pilot study. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Joel, for a fantastic talk there. Really interesting about clinical trials, because obviously that's been in the news for quite a while at the moment with everything that's going on. To actually be able to see how a clinical trial works across a large area, especially in Southeast Asia, is really interesting, and actually bringing it down to something slightly smaller scale as well for more sort of one-to-one or smaller trials that are going on that you've just mentioned. So that's absolutely great. So we do have a few questions for you. So this one, hopefully you can help with this one, is so the question is actually malaria prevention. Has Thailand tested randomized control trials for providing the population with mosquito nets? So this was investigated by Poverty Action Lab in Kenya. So do you know if this has happened in Thailand at all?
So I'm not sure about Thailand specifically. There have been trials for bed nets in Southeast Asia, which have largely shown them to be less effective than they are in Africa. And that's partly because the mosquitoes, the vectors, just behave very differently, as do humans, in terms of when they are exposed. And that's a really good example of why we need trials in different locations, because generally a lot of the malaria fighting strategies were to a great extent for a very long time reliant on the use of bed nets. Whereas people in Southeast Asia, researchers often argued it's just not enough in the region here. And here we have a much stronger focus on early diagnosis and treatment, which to a great extent was done through the village health workers that I mentioned, that we're working with now as well, by providing them with malaria RDTs that I mentioned, the rapid tests, and treatment to make sure that we do test and treat very quickly to prevent further transmission.
Excellent. So another question that's just come in. Are you concerned with the inherent bias in meta-analysis? Hypothetically, some company may sponsor a lot of studies that favour a certain result, so that meta-analysis would yield a result in that direction too.
Absolutely, and this is well, I mean, it's true for studies of all designs, not just meta-analyses. There are publication biases. There's a general trend, of course, for studies that have a positive result to go into high-impact journals. So that creates one bias where most of the evidence that is visible favors an intervention, whereas studies that just didn't have an exciting result just don't get as much of as much visibility. So you have those biases creeping in. Yes, commercial interests do play a part. I've experienced that myself in things that I've worked on, where initially it looked like, wow, I talk about different biomarkers. So one biomarker for which there was a commercial test available, seemed to have a lot of good results published, whereas where we looked at it ourselves, it just underperformed. And I heard that from other researchers as well. And I'm speculating here, but I do think there was a certain drive by the kind of commercial support, the funding for this biomarker test that just drove more of a positive result and maybe left some of the less promising results for this biomarker. No, they just weren't as visible.
Fair enough. Well, thank you, Yoel. Thank you very much, Yoel, for your talk. That's been absolutely fantastic. So we've got now a few more questions that have come in for some of the other speakers as well. So I am going to fire these ones off. So for Olivier, are there any citizen science projects around air pollution in Thailand?
That's a good question, actually. Yes, there is a lab, open lab for the people to come and create their own low-cost sensor. And there is also recently, since 1 year now, a kind of initiative that includes civil society into a forum where the people can participate to the negotiation and the discussion about how to better control the fires in Chiang Mai. Let's say that from 2015 to 2019, the approach by the government was pretty much top-down and it didn't work. So now they understood the need to include the civil society into the negotiation process, the whole process. So yes, there are some kind of experiments like this going on at the moment, yeah.
Fantastic. So that's great to become involved with those kind of things and hopefully help the area around where you live as well. We have another question for Piacon. What would happen if a country just chose to ignore COVID patent and make a vaccine themselves?
Yes. Actually, I believe that COVID, actually, when we file the application, it doesn't mean that we file everywhere in the world. For example, they might not file the application in Thailand. We have to search first. If there is no patent filed in Thailand, so it means that we can use it. But the problem right now is not only whether or not we have a patent on it or not. Patent filed on this, for example, mRNA vaccine technology. Actually, they may file some application in 20 countries. And after that, after other countries, we can also use it, manufacturing in those countries that they have no patent protection. However, at this time, some technology needs a skilled person or manufacturing facility. I think that is not in dealing with this pandemic. It's not only the patent issue. It's the issue of the other things as well. For example, skilled person that can manufacture the vaccine or any facility that we can use. Yeah.
So if it's actually in the country that is patented and someone just decides, actually, we need this, we're just going to make it ourselves, what would happen at that point?
Yeah, actually, if we for example, in Thailand, the government can use the compulsory licensing if it is meet the requirement. The compulsory licensing is the one that is very is allowable according to the TRIPS agreement. So in Thailand, we have a compulsory licensing as well, but the government has to be used. the compulsory licensing against any patent granted patent. But I believe that the patent that is filed in Thailand right now, no patent application have been related to the COVID have been granted yet, because it started filing since last year, and it will take around 4 or 5 years to get a patent granted. Once the patent is granted, so it means that it can enforce the patentee can enforce the patent right. In that time, is if anyone would like to use this, we have to negotiate with the patentee whether or not the license can be given in order to avoid any dispute in the future. But if it's really it's very important, and many people in Thailand is infected by COVID, the last chance is the government may enforce the compulsory licensing on it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Pirkon. We have a question for Richard. 91% of people wearing masks correctly is impressively high. So is that because COVID communications over the last year were clear, or is it because Thai people have been wearing masks in the past for other reasons?
I can speculate, but we should ask them. So we've actually interviewed people and asked about wearing a mask, and I think the level of understanding is very high. People are used to wearing them before the pandemic for other reasons. The air pollution has been mentioned as well.
Okay. There is one more question floating around somewhere, but I haven't had it sent to me yet, so I don't actually know what it is. So I can randomly ask something, or if it can come through. It's coming up, apparently. So we're waiting with bated breath, and I think it's for Richard as well. Somewhere. Here we go. Oh, yes, here we are. So, Richard, and also possibly Olivia as well. So how about wearing a mask when running when it is difficult to breathe?
That's a great question. So the residential data that I presented, quite a lot of those people outdoors in residential areas were exercising. So they had a low proportion of people using masks. It's said that you can still breathe okay, but I think the problem is you become hot and sweaty and it's quite uncomfortable. So it is an issue. There's also talk about the mask is less effective when it's wet anyway. So in some countries, they don't recommend wearing a mask during exercise, just staying distant from people. In Thailand, that's not the case. We are supposed to wear masks in public.
Excellent. So we've got another question for Claire this time. How can we prevent from getting melioidosis?
Okay, because vaccine is not yet available, so protections by wearing protective gears for farmers when they do farming or drink boiled water, I think that will be the best approach to help prevent people from acquiring the bacterium. My colleagues, Ajahn Direk Limatuskuns, actually organized a study cohort, try to set up a campaign for villagers to wearing boots and also drink boiled water. So a research nurse in Ubon Ratchathani, they try to encourage a local discussing group and then takes the photograph of the volunteers. And in this photograph, the volunteers, many of which are farmers, they have the photos of them wearing boots and also holding kettles. And this photos is pasted on the household calendar as a reminder on the daily basis that they should wear protective gears and drink boiled water. So that's what we try to encourage people to do right now while the vaccine is under development. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. I think that's all the questions we've had so far tonight. So I think we will wrap this up. I just want to say a big thank you to all our speakers tonight. There have been absolutely fantastic talks. So thank you again, Claire, Richard, Olivia, Pirkon and Yoel for your talks. Thank you very much indeed. A big thank you to Moru and Welcome for making it possible to run this event by sponsoring us. A big thank you also to our host, the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand, and Anna Lee, who you briefly saw at the start. I know she wanted to say that the FCCT runs a series of fascinating talks, which you can see on their Facebook and YouTube channels. So please do go back and visit them. This and our other events would not take place without the hard work behind the scenes by our Pint of Science team. So a big thank you to Rita, Ice, Kael and Natini, and of course my co-host tonight, Pei Kyong. So thank you very much for all your assistance in this. A big thank you to David Foster and his team at JN Digital Media for the amazing production tonight. And thank you, the audience, for taking part. Please do let us know what you think of tonight's event and keep your eyes open for other Pint of Science events happening around the world next week. So finally for me, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Good night.